Alright guys, welcome to phase 3 of pen turning. I'm Mr. Rasmussen, the woodbender, master of all shop elements. Today we're going to be doing sanding, finishing, and then assembling our pens. Now before we get started, I want to talk about what finishing means. When we finish our pen, that doesn't mean we're actually done, because a finish in a wood shop is referring to a product that's applied to wood on any project. It creates a sealant, a barrier protection, and it brings out the grain of the material, makes it look nice, perfect, and beautiful. And so that's what we're going to be doing with our pens. But after we finish, we're not actually done with our project. We still need to assemble the pen. After we've assembled, then we're completely done with our project.
Alright, so we just got done with shaping our pen. We're going to go ahead and grab some sandpaper. We'll need one disc that's in the 100s, one that's in the 200s, and one in the 300s. And you can see that the number is printed on the back of each disc. We're going to leave our setup basically the exact same as when we were turning on the lathe, but we can go ahead and move the tailstock and the tool rest out of the way. So I'm going to start with the lowest grit, the 120 grit sandpaper. The way that sandpaper works is the lower the grit, the more material the sandpaper is going to be taking out. As the number gets higher, less material will be taken out, but the surface will be made more and more smooth to the touch. Now, the speed of the lathe should still be at about 1,000 RPMs. And what I'm doing here with the 120 grit is the most important part of the sanding process. Since 120 will take out the most material, I'm using this grit to bring my pen to its absolute final shape and size. I'm smoothing out all the rough patches, and you'll notice when you turn off the lathe that there will be sections of your pen where the cutter has ripped out chunks of wood and left cutting marks. I really need to get all those marks out with the 120 grit. So guys, really take your time with the 120 grit. I'd say you should spend a minimum of at least 5 minutes with just the 120 grit. In my experience, sanding is really what's going to separate the good pens from the great pens. This is really what's going to separate the grasshoppers from the grass masters. You want your pen to not only look smooth, but it needs to feel smooth and feel good in your hand when you're writing with it. So guys, I cannot emphasize enough to just take your time on this step. Make sure it's absolutely perfect before you move on. Once I've spent at least 5 minutes with the 120 grit and my pen is looking and feeling smooth and even, I can move on to using the 200 grit sandpaper. You can use any grit of sandpaper in the 200s, so 220, 240, 250, or any 3-digit number starting with a 2 will be fine. I'm using 240 grit, and I'm going to be doing basically the exact same thing that I did with the 120 grit. The only difference is now the sandpaper is taking off less material, and it's more about smoothing out our pen to feel smooth to the touch now. You want to turn off the lathe every so often and check your progress by hand. Take a good look at every angle of your pen. Make sure there's no cut marks that have been left, and go ahead and feel with your hand the progress that you're making. And as you do this, you'll be able to feel any of those rough patches that your eye just can't pick up at this point. So go ahead and spend a few minutes with the 200 grit. And let me mention that more important than the exact amount of time you spend, the quality of your sanding is more important. So basically, I can't say that there's an exact amount of time that everyone should spend on this step. Basically, just check your progress often and be safe now so that you don't have to be sorry later. And after we've concluded that our 200 grit is consistent across our pen, we're ready to move up to 300 grit. And guess what? Sanding with 300 grit is going to be exactly the same as sanding with the lower grits. So same pond, different fish. Sand consistently and evenly across the pen until you feel that it's smooth all around to the touch. One last thing that I'd like for you to notice is that I'm consistently moving my contact point around on my pen. I'm moving it around constantly for a couple of reasons. First, if I were to just leave my hand and the sandpaper in the same spot for even just a few seconds, that friction between the wood and the sandpaper is going to start to heat up, and your fingers underneath are going to start to heat up with it. The second reason is if I'm holding the contact point in the same spot, I'm going to be removing material from just that one spot alone. And if I do this, I'm really changing the shape of my pen, and I can end up with a little valley in the wood. I want to avoid this, so keep adjusting your contact point every couple of seconds, and you won't have to battle either of those problems. Alright, we're ready to start finishing. To start out, we'll need some tissues and a bottle of the finish. First thing you'll do is just grab a tissue, turn on the lathe, and then just use the tissue to remove all the dust that is still on the pen. And also make sure to give the bottle of finish a good shake before you use it. Now go ahead and just dab a few drops of the finish onto your tissue. We're going to work this into the wood, so just hold it up, contact the wood lightly, and begin to work that in nice and evenly. Once that's been worked in, we're going to keep the lathe on and just let it air dry for about a minute or so. And one thing about this step is I need to make sure that the lid of the finish is tightly closed whenever I'm not using it. I don't want any spills or any stickiness in my shop. Now after that air dry, we'll take a part of our tissue that's dry and remove any excess finish from our pen. And after we've done that, we're going to do the exact same steps again to apply another coat of finish to our pen. And after that second coat, make sure to remove the excess by drying the pen with the tissue. And now we're ready to take our pen off the lathe and move on to assembling. And when it comes time to clean up, the finish needs to go inside the orange flammable proof box, and the door of that box needs to be closed as well.
Alright, so over at the workbench, I'm going to need to use this pen press to help me assemble my pen. The first step will be to grab the tip of the pen from our pen kit. The tip is going to be pressed into the top of one of our blanks. And to do this, I'll need the tip to go into the little hole that is in the red part of the pen press. Make sure that the barrel of the pen and the tip are properly aligned before pressing together.
Next, press the twist mechanism into the opposite end of this same half of your pen. The brass side is the side that goes into the tube. You'll want to use a lot of finesse for this part. Finesse means that I'm using just enough strength to make it work. I'm not going to go full Super Saiyan on this step, basically. The reason is that I'm only going to push in the mechanism till it's almost to the indent. So just past the brass section. This is a part where a lot of students end up messing up their pen, which is a real shame because they've made it so far. If you do that, your pen just isn't going to function. It's not going to be able to twist. So remember, just use that finesse on this step. Next, you'll twist in the ink and twist using the twist mechanism to make sure that the ink is extruding and concealing itself all the way before continuing. The twist mechanism can be pushed in a little farther as needed, but once it's pushed in, it's really hard to move it back out, so be careful with that. Next, we'll slip the clip and the cap components together. You'll press the clip and the cap into the end of the other half of your pen. Now you'll slide the center band over the twist mechanism, then slide the top half on to complete your pen. Go ahead and twist and make sure that the components function properly.
So I am super happy with how my pen turned out. When I look at it, the design is consistent all the way across. It feels and looks nice. When I twist to open the cap or open the ink, it actually opens and extrudes all the way. When I close it, it closes all the way. That's a big problem that I run into with students, is that their pens don't always extrude. Well, sometimes they extrude too much, and then when I try to close it, it doesn't end up closing all the way. So you need to make sure that you've assembled properly. That way you can have a pen that actually looks good and functions properly. Probably one of the biggest problems I run into with my students is when they're making their pens and assembling and putting in the twist mechanism, they end up pushing in that twist mechanism in way too far. That causes it so that when I actually extrude the pen's coming out up to here, and when I try to close the pen, it doesn't actually have enough room to close. And so your pen is just constantly always open. You never can actually have it close, and ends up making problems. I mean, your ink's going to dry out. You put it in your pocket, in your backpack, you end up drawing on everything. It's just a problem that you don't want to run into. So once again, when this goes on, you only go to the indent. I went just up to the indent just to try, and mine still works fine. So just go to the indent or less. You can always go more. It ends up being a problem when you go too far. It ends up being hard to fix after that.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody. I wish everyone good luck in building their pen, and may the force be with you.